I would like to invite Dr. Santosh Kumar Pada. He is the Associate Professor at the Department of Pediatrics, Kalinga Institute of Medical Sciences, Bhubaneswar, Odisha. So, sir, I would like you to take over, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
A very good afternoon to all. Respected senior members present in this scientific session and dear friends. Today's scientific discussion based on the perinatal asphyxia, birth asphyxia, and neonatal seizures. Particularly, we are going to be handling the neonatal neurology sections today. Right. To go to the by definition of asphyxia, the asphyxia means it is the gas exchange. When the fetus have impairment of the gas exchange, fetus will landed in the hypoxia and hypercarbia and fetal acidosis. So this compromised fetus or hypoxic fetus, when this baby will born, baby will present in the form of limp. That means there is low muscle tone, baby unable to having any either spontaneous breathing effort. So baby having low heart rate, that means bradycardia, and hypoxic, so baby will look blue, which usually clinically measure in the form of Apgar score. That is called, we commonly tell it is birth asphyxia or perinatal asphyxia. So this perinatal asphyxia is responsible around 25% of neonatal mortality in India, and also it is the most common cause of the stillbirth. To define perinatal asphyxia, there is different, this nomenclature was defined differently, but for bedside, for clinical perspectively, the WHO defined that if a neonate unable to failure to initiate and sustain breathing is called asphyxia neonate. The NNPD of India, they defined based on the Apgar score. That means if the Apgar score are less than 7 at 1 means it's called asphyxia neonate. And if Apgar is less than 3 at 1 minute, or there is no breathing at birth, then we say severe asphyxia. If at birth the Apgar at 1 minute is 4 to 6, or maybe in slower gastric breathing, it is called moderate asphyxia. The same terminology, perinatal asphyxia, also defined by the SCOG in based on the umbilical cord blood gas, multi-organ dysfunction, Apgar score at 5 minutes, need of resuscitation. So it's a very complex definition given by the SCOG, but it is very conventional and practical is that by the WHO, what usually asks the parents at time of admission that whether babies cried at birth or not. So scientifically it is called failure to initiate and sustain breathing. As per the WHO, it's called perinatal asphyxia. One more terminology is called neonatal encephalopathy. So encephalopathy means brain dysfunction. When there is a brain dysfunction, it is clinically manifested by either decreased consciousness or there is some abnormal tone and with or without seizure. So encephalopathy is a very big umbrella. This encephalopathy could be due to birth asphyxia, or it could be due to hypoglycemic brain injury, or it could be due to sepsis, or it could be some structural etiology, or it could be some kind of prolonged duration of seizure, so or it could be drug-induced encephalopathy. So encephalopathy means brain dysfunction. Under this encephalopathy, low consciousness level, abnormal tone, this hypotonia or hypertonia, with or without presence of seizure. So this another term is called HI, that is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So HI, we tell HI when there is a background of perinatal asphyxia is present in an encephalopathy neonate. It is called HI, that is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. The terminology hypoxic means diminished amount of oxygen supply. It's called hypoxia. Ischemia, diminished blood perfusion to the organ, is called ischemia. So hypoxic ischemic, decreased oxygen supply, decreased blood supply to the brain, leads to brain dysfunction is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy in the background of perinatal asphyxia. It's called HI. So HI is the evidence of, when there is evidence of intrapartum asphyxia as a cause of encephalopathy, it is called hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And this cause, it could be either antepartum, intrapartum, or postpartum. What is the background of asphyxia? The asphyxia is two kinds. Either it is acute asphyxia, that means the fetus is suddenly compromised. The scenario like there is sudden rupture of uterus, placental abruption, prolapse of umbilical cord, fetal-maternal hemorrhage, or some there is maternal sudden hypotension like maternal anaphylaxis, mother has some cardiogenic shock. In that, when the fetus is suddenly compromised, that is called acute asphyxia. Some scenario fetus is vulnerable for the chronic asphyxia, like for consider intrauterine growth restricted neonate with some abnormal Doppler. Example, when there is a mother has some high risk mother like mama's chorioamnitis, multiple pregnancy, mother blood hypertension, diabetes, or whether mother having during the birth process mother having meconium stem liquor, which is suggestive of fetal distress. So to identify the fetal distress during the delivery time, that during the labor process, we are assessing the fetal well-being. Commonly, we are doing through the intermittent fetal heart rate auscultation through the stethoscope, or you can do the continuous electronic fetal heart rate monitoring, that is called cardiotocography. In cardiotocography, we have to look at three things. One is the fetal heart rate, normally 110 to 160. When there is a fetal tachycardia or fetal bradycardia, we will look at the fetal heart rate variability. If there is absent or low decrease variability, or presence of fetal heart rate acceleration deflection. When there is a fetal tachycardia or bradycardia, absence of variability, presence of lead deceleration is present, it suggests that fetus is going to compromise, that is presence of fetal distress. We have to try to get out the fetus as quickly as possible to prevent further hypoxia. So, to prevent birth asphyxia or perinatal asphyxia, we can have two preventive strategies. One is the intrapartum fetal monitoring. Number to identify the fetal distress fetus. Number two, we have to do there is the evidence-based neonatal resuscitation practices, that is called delivery care practices. Some scientific salient points which helpful during the newborn at the time of birth, that is called golden minutes of birth. That is one is if you are going to resuscitate a neonate more than 35 weeks or term neonate, we should start resuscitation with the room air, 21%. Either you can give positive pressure ventilation if maybe need through the self-inflating bag and mask or through the TP. If you are going to handle less than 35 weeks gestation preterm neonate, then you should resuscitate with some kind of oxygen around 21 to 30% oxygen, preferable through the TP. And during resuscitation, if baby remain hypoxia as per the time targeted saturation is not achieved, we should adjust our oxygen concentration. One more scenario is called meconium stem liquor. Particularly when a baby born through the meconium stem liquor, either fetus, this neonate either vigorous or non-vigorous. When you are going to handle a non-vigorous neonate, don't hurry to intubate the baby and suction to the endotracheal, suction to the trachea. Always better to go to initiate positive pressure ventilation. If there is significant airway obstruction is present, then you may go for the endotracheal suction. Another evidence towards presence of fetal distress or fetal compromise is the arterial cord blood analysis. So this umbilical cord analysis means we have to take a heparin syringe from the umbilical artery, and if you have a ABG machine, you will look at the pH and the base excess. If your umbilical pH, artery pH is less than 7 and your base excess is more than -16, is suggestive that the child is suffering from in utero asphyxia, and it is if there is presence of metabolic acidosis, it suggests that his fetus is compromised for a longer duration. Sometimes in the umbilical cord ABG, we found there is a respiratory acidosis. That is, pH is low, pH2 is retended, less, very low amount of base excess, something minus 5 to minus 10 something, predominantly respiratory acidosis. It is usually found in case of acute asphyxia, particularly cord prolapse or that sentinel event we have already discussed. So what is the importance of cord ABG? The evidence suggests that if the cord ABG abnormality, particularly the pH less than 7, base excess more than minus 16, it also has a good association with short-term outcome like mortality, presence of hypoglycemic encephalopathy or some neuronal. It also can predict the long-term prognosis towards the presence, possibility of cerebral palsy. So, till now, conventionally, what we know that we should resuscitate the neonate as per our NRP protocol. Now this new entity to identify this fetal distress is called the umbilical cord arterial ABG. And if you look at two entities, one is the pH, another is the base excess. So what happens during the process of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy? I told hypoxia means decreased oxygen supply, ischemia means decreased blood flow. So to our neurons, there is particularly what happens? Then there is decreased blood flow, decreased oxygen supply. So the neuron, the works through presence of ATP. So when there is hypoxia and ischemia insult happens, there is energy failure, decreased ATP production. So this neuron now suffered, and the neuron is vulnerable to death. That happens during the phase of primary energy failure, which happens within first 4 to 6 hours. Again, in the second phase, what happens? After the primary energy failure, after the hypoxic ischemic insult, there is a reperfusion, that is increased blood flow to the brain. So this period, again, this same neuron is vulnerable for this group of neurons, again vulnerable for the secondary energy failure. And there is a lots of things happen during the secondary energy failure, like sometimes the neonates can manifest like seizure, presence some free radical damage, there's some excitotoxic neurotransmitter release, and there is two pathological way the neuron is going to die during this latter phase, that is called necrosis and apoptosis. So the neuron, if you look at the left side of this graph, this cell death after the hypoxic ischemic insult, the two phase, primary energy failure, secondary energy failure. And look at the cell death happens. In between the primary energy failure and secondary energy failure, there is a window that is called latent period. God given to us to best utilize the latent period to prevent further neuronal damage. So this is the basic behind the pathophysiology, very simplified way, or the pathophysiology of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So if we take one line summary towards the pathophysiology of HI, one is due to decreased blood flow, decreased oxygen supply to the neuron is dying initially due to necrosis. That is the primary energy failure. And during the secondary energy failure, the rest of the neurons, that is the umbra, penumbra, what is called, this is very complex thing, I can very simplify, that during the secondary energy failure, the neurons are majorly dying out of necrosis and apoptosis. That is called programmed cell death. So, if a neonate already suffered from perinatal asphyxia, we should give best evidence-based care after birth, so that we can prevent further brain injury. So now this baby at birth, let's having Apgar score is less than 7 at 5 minutes, that is suggests your this fetus is compromised. Or you can assess the fetal compromise, the newborn compromise based on 1 minute after score or 5 minutes after score. So which neonate you will select for the NICU admission, particularly if a baby requiring more than 1 minute diagonal positive pressure ventilation. One, if you will define based on Apgar score, if Apgar score is 0 to 3 at 1 minute, some people consider less than 7 at 5 minutes, or need some sort of aggressive resuscitation in the form of a neonate requiring chest compression, drugs like adrenaline, or intratracheal intubation. This can obviously will need NICU admission. Suppose a baby you think his child is mild to moderate asphyxiated, and within with 30 seconds or 45 seconds with positive pressure ventilation, baby has spontaneous breathing. Now baby is comfortable and is shifting to the baby to the mother side. It is always better to monitor the baby for next 48 to 72 hours. So the asphyxia, not only that means this asphyxiated neonate having hypoxia and ischemia not only affect the brain, it is a particularly the fetus remain in the hypoxic state in utero, that is before labor or during labor process. All organs of the neonate are suffered some kind of decreased blood flow and hypoxia related injury. So the asphyxia, the perinatal asphyxia clinically manifests as multi-organ dysfunction, and predominantly I can tell the CNS renal system more commonly affected. Around if you take CNS and renal system, 50% is affected. Heart and lungs and GI tract is also 25% risk of affected, chance of affection. So see whether this is asphyxiated neonate having CNS system, the clinical manifestation either it could be like I told you that a hypoxic encephalopathy, or the child can have intracranial hemorrhage. During if a cardiac system, he has a myocardial dysfunction, so child neonate vulnerable for the congestive, and then the cardiogenic shock. Sometimes neonates can present with a congestive cardiac failure, or sometimes they are having some valvular dysfunction, a rhythm abnormality, and AKI also that acute kidney injury, secondary to acute tubular necrosis or renal vein thrombosis is the renal manifestation in HI neonate. Similarly, lungs also landed in the presence of PPHN, that is primary pulmonary hypertension, or if it is the born with meconium stent, like there is some meconium syndrome, sometimes surfactant depletion happens also. So child can also present with a respiratory failure. Similarly, GI tract, the neonate, they are vulnerable for necrotizing enterocolitis, and the hematological manifestation in the form of DIC and thrombocytopenia is an event. This is a very classical clinical feature each one of you face whenever you severe, moderate to severe HI neonates admitted in your neonate, and the neurological deterioration in case of moderate to severe neonates usually manifests 12 to 72 hours afterwards. Okay, so this is a very classical clinical experience of a severe HI neonate. So basically, we have discussed that the HI neonate is a encephalopathy baby, that means a brain dysfunction child. Okay, so the severity of brain dysfunction is assessed by different scoring systems, and most commonly is the Sarnat and Sarnat scoring, particular to term in HI, for term HI neonate. It is based on multiple parameters like level of consciousness, tone, posture, and some primitive presence of primitive reflex and autonomic function. And it also included even the EEG background. Considering all this, it is mild, moderate, and severe. It is classified. So if you make it more simplified, which commonly I can tell, same all parameters, the important parameters we can consider. I can tell you everyone best to use in the bedside is the Levin schedule. Very difficult to remember and mug up also to the Carnot, but if you same thing, but Levin schedule. To remember very simplify, I can tell you, if you remember what the SQT. SQT means first S is the sensorium. Here it is mentioned consciousness. With a mild HI, it is childhood irritable. Moderate HI, it is a lethargy. Severe child, it is comatose. So sensorium. Then seizure. Second S, seizure. No seizure, mild. Obviously, the child having moderate seizure or presence of seizure means it is moderate to severe HI. Similarly, I can remember sucking. Sucking or respiratory support. If child is unable to very poor suck, it is mild. Unable to suck means moderate HI. Child is unable to forget about suck. If child is unable to have breathing, need some breathing support, need some respiratory support. It is severe HI. SQ, then T, tone. Tone means it is hypotonia, mild. It is mild hypotonia and severe hypotonia. It is moderate to severe HIV. So same thing if you go to previous slide is Carnot. Carnot and Carnot, what do you think you look at? Then if you look at the seizure absent in mild, seizure present plus minus in moderate, and frequent often refractory to anticonvulsant in case of severe. Okay. So refractory often refractory anticonvulsant means conventional tell that we may be required to more than 2 anticonvulsants to control seizure. It's called refractory seizure conventionally. Okay. So similarly, in mild, you will get basically a alert or particularly most of the time get a hyper alert baby, and they have a very most time they have a spontaneous activity, normal posture and tone could be normal or hypertonia, particularly in case of mild HIV. So hyper irritable child, excess crying child with something, some kind of parasympathetic activity, tachycardia, dilated pupil, irritability, jitteriness. This is a mild HIV. This kind of baby most of the time is supported if you are doing well, and particularly to moderate to severe HIV, you have to identify. And if you have a better support, there is some neuroprotective strategy like therapeutic hypothermia is present. Facility, care is available. You can provide to the baby also. We'll discuss later. But this is very important, not only for the beginning part. This severity of encephalopathy or severity of asphyxia is very important. If you have some strategy like therapeutic aspect like therapeutic hypothermia is available with you. And during that means you have to take decision of giving therapeutic hypothermia within first 6 hours of life based on the severity of encephalopathy or severity of asphyxia. One, during the management of these HI neonates, the staging is important to prognosticate and to communicate the family member and prognosticate also short-term and long-term morbidity. So now this neonate is admitted on NICU. Let's maybe having moderate to severe asphyxia, moderate to severe asphyxia, maybe based on the NNP data, his observed score less than 6, and at one minute, or less than 7 at 5 minutes, admitted in the NICU. And you have first, during your neonatal care or NICU care practice, what is the brain protective strategy you will apply? That is neuroprotective strategy or brain protective strategy you will give so that your further brain injury can be prevented. Okay. To remember, like I told you, SQ2 for the staging of encephalopathy. Similarly, I will give some rules of steps, 5 steps commonly. Let's first, in neonatal practice, it is the TABC, temperature, airway, breathing, circulation. In that way, we are managing the newborn. So let's first discuss about temperature. If you are taking care of a moderate to severe HI neonate, you have a level 3 NICU where a therapeutic hypothermia facility available. Obviously, we will go for the cooling strategy. Most of the centers in our SNCU, the therapeutic hypothermia care is not available. So the basic message during the temperature care is that child to keep the baby in the euthermic condition. You keep the temperature around 36.5 to 37 degrees centigrade. And most important is avoid hyperthermia, because hyperthermia is making more brain injury. One part. So avoid hyperthermia. So for that thing, I make more bold is hyperthermia. So hyperthermia is very dangerous to the asphyxiated neonatal brain. Second, if your baby having moderate to severe asphyxia, it always start with IV fluid. And this baby are vulnerable for early onset hypocalcemia. So your initial fluid will be, in case of term unit, late preterm and term unit, 10% dextrose with 4 ml per kg calcium gluconate is your initial fluid of choice. And during, usually what we are doing in the first 48 hours, we are giving dextrose fluid with calcium. After 48 hours, we have to give fluid with some electrolytes, like we are adding sodium, potassium, and calcium in your maintenance fluid. The important concept is that previously, what you know, in HI neonates, we are going for the fluid restriction. Some people giving in 2/3 fluid restriction. For example, day 1 you are giving 60 cc, day 2 you give 75 cc, day 3 you are giving 90 cc, and day 4 you are giving into 110 cc, like that one. And if you are handling a HI neonate, and day 3 instead of giving 90 cc, people used to give fluid restriction, giving 70 cc, 60 cc, like that one. So the current practice, the fluid restriction is no more holds good. Fluid restriction is only required if there is a presence of hyponatremia. And the hyponatremia in case of HI neonate, usually due to 2 reasons. One is due to the SIADH, that is excess production of ADH hormone, so that the child will be edematous, they decrease urine output, there is a dilutional hyponatremia. Usually, the child will be excess weight gain. Usually what happens after birth, a term neonate loses 1 to 2% of their weight every day. And by day 5 to 7, day 5, they lose around 5 to 7% of their birth weight. And they regain their birth weight by the 7 to 10 days of life. So in HI neonates, what happens usually, if there is a SIADH present, instead of losing weight, usually they either remain same weight or gain weight. The child become more edematous. This phenomenon happens in 2 scenarios. Either it could be due to SIADH or the presence of HI or presence of congestive cardiac failure. So in that scenario, there is a dilutional hyponatremia. If there is a dilutional hyponatremia, it is always preferable to go for the fluid restriction. Otherwise, it will give fluid restriction in all cases. Majority baby will land in a hypoperfusion. That means the intravascular fluid volume will decrease. So that is one message during towards fluid therapy during HI management. That means add calcium gluconate from day 1, at least for 2 to 3 days, with 10% dextrose, and fluid restriction is only indicated during presence of hyponatremia with presence of SIADH or AKI. Another is the hypoglycemia. How to prevent hypoglycemia? Because if asphyxia with hypoglycemia, the brain injury will increase many-fold. That means, so again, in the asphyxia scenario, we always try to keep the target blood glucose is above 70, because the alternative fuel already it is a condition associated with the energy failure. If further hypoglycemia, further energy failure, that means further brain injury will happen. So you target during HI management the blood sugar between 70 to 110 or 120. You should avoid hypoglycemia. You should avoid hyperglycemia. If your blood glucose is, some people consider more than 125 or more than some people consider above 150 as hyperglycemia. But conventionally, message is that during HI management, you should glucose monitoring, bedside glucose monitoring every 6 hours initial days, because if it further hypoglycemia HI baby, is a further energy failure up to the brain, and the further brain damage will happen. So strictly blood glucose monitoring every 6 hours, the initial 3 to 5 days, 3 days, and target blood glucose should be something 70 to 100 milligram per deciliter. Again, if this baby having respiratory distress, that means either due to, I've told already, if a child born with Meconium like is vulnerable for Meconium aspect syndrome. In this scenario, there is a risk of surfactant depletion, presence of secondary pulmonary hypertension, okay, presence of cardiac failure, okay, presence of cardiogenic shock. All cardiorespiratory compromises happen in a moderate to severe HI unit. So if a baby having respiratory distress or respiratory distress with maybe with metabolic acidosis or respiratory distress with respiratory failure, presence of hypoxia with or without hypercarbia, you may find in that scenario, based on your severity of respiratory distress, you have to give the respiratory support. Similarly, you should assess the respiratory distress where either you use the Downey scoring or Silverman-Anderson scoring, can do one blood gas, look at presence of respiratory failure, and you can give whether it is requiring oxygen therapy, if there is severe respiratory distress or respiratory failure, you can go for the non-invasive. If you are having spontaneous respiratory report, you may try non-invasive respiratory support. If you are having poor respiratory report, then you can go for invasive mechanical ventilation. So basic message is that during management of HI, you should avoid two things. One is, again, same age principle, avoid hypoxia and hyperoxia. The hypoxia means your saturation is less than 90 is called hypoxia, intermediate. Hyperoxia, simplified, your saturation is above 95%, is called, we may be associated with hyperoxia. If you are giving hyperoxia, then you have a more chance of free radical oxygen associated free radical injury. That is the final pathway towards any kind of neuronal injury. So, if you are giving any kind of oxygen support or respiratory support, you target saturation between 90 to 95% or 90 to 95%, unless associated with the PCHS. That little bit higher oxygen saturation may target. If you do a blood gas, you target PO2 between 60 to 90, and your PCO2 should be between 35 to 45 or 50. You should avoid, again, if you are giving ventilating, most of the time we are ventilating HI unit for the CNS prospectively due to poor respiratory report or having apneic seizure, or you are ventilating for respiratory cause. If you are ventilating for the CNS cause, due to poor respiratory report, due to bradypnea, poor respiratory report, most of the time baby may require minimal respiratory support. Don't over aggressive to ventilate the child, your PCO2 will come down. Baby will land in the hypocarbia. If your neonate landed in the hypocarbia, then there is decreased cerebral blood flow, and if hypercarbia, increased cerebral blood flow. So avoid hypocarbia and hypercarbia. Again, you should avoid hypotension. You should target normal tissue perfusion to maintain to the neonate, and you should measure the non-invasive blood pressure, or if you have feasibility of invasive blood pressure, and other parameters like look at the pulse volume, peripheral pulse volume, capillary refill time, urine output, and if you have facility of blood gas, look at the ABG, whether presence of metabolic acidosis presence or not. Usually in the shock, in case of HI unit, managed with one, maximum given 1 or 2 fluid bolus. Don't go beyond that one. Preferably go for the one maximum 1 fluid bolus, 10 ml per kg, slowly over 10 to 20 minutes, and followed by some kind of inotrope like preferred dobutamine over dopamine many times due to presence of cardiogenic shock. So this is a very important message. Avoid hypothermia, hypoxia, hyperoxia, hypercarbia, hypoglycemia, hypotension. This is basic message during the management of the HI unit. So, and if you look at the lab investigation, so commonly I've told you the blood glucose monitoring, some units at least required once or twice a day, serum mononucleotide monitoring initial 3 to 5 days. If you look at your risk factors such as like choriamnitis, prolonged duration, leaking TB, maternal fever, maternal UTI, background is present. Send blood culture, send sepsis screening. You can start also antibiotic and just on the local antibiogram. You may look also coagulation profile. So in case of HIV, if there is a background risk factor of sepsis is present and your culture is positive or sepsis screening some more suggestive of sepsis, then you may go for the lumbar puncture. Otherwise, routinely, many all HIV are not going for the. If a background of perineal distress present, you may not require that doing a lumbar puncture, not always mandatory. Very clear part is presence of fetal distress is present, and there no significant history of this factor of sepsis is present. So again, one important aspect I have that is the aggressive seizure control part. We'll discuss during the management of the neonatal seizure, and this particularly during the management of HIV neonates. For imaging, you can particularly you can if have a bedside cranial ultrasound, you can get that its utility to rule out structural abnormality, intracranial hemorrhage. Sometimes your first 24 to 70 to 48 hours, the anterocerebral artery Doppler velocity, from Doppler you can get the resistive index. If a resistive index is less than 0.55 in the first 24 to 72 hours, it's a very poor prognosis in case of HIV neonates. Will not, due to lack of time, will not discuss about the utility of the EEG and neuroimaging presently. If time permits, I will discuss. But what is important, just very not tell the newer strategy is the newer and standard neuroprotective strategy for a moderate to severe HIV neonate is therapeutic hypothermia. I can tell time will come. It is the birth right of a moderate to severe HIV neonate in future. So very carefully can discuss that. What we are doing to start the cooling therapy, we bring down the core temperature to moderate to hypothermia, that is 33 to 34 degrees. We maintain this temperature for 6 hours to 72 hours. After 72 hours, we go for the slow rewarming at the rate of 0.5 degree per hour. For over 6 to 8 hours, we slowly rewarming to the neonate core temperature for 34 degree to 36.5 degrees. So, who are the eligible neonates with moderate hypothermia, moderate to severe HI or asphyxia, eligible for therapeutic hypothermia? Number one, the gestational age more than 35 weeks or birth weight at least more than 2 kg. The presence of moderate to severe encephalopathy is suggested in the form of presence of low Abgar score. That means at 5 minutes, Abgar is less than equal or less than 5. Need for positive perfusion ventilation for 5 minutes. Or the umbilical cord ABG or baby's blood ABG, either venous ABG or arterial blood gas within first 1 hour of life, if pH is less than 7, base excess is more than -16. That is very, on clinical examination, there is a presence of neonatal encephalopathy. I have told you, altered sensorium, tone, abnormality, presence or absence of seizure, suggestive of presence of encephalopathy. If it is present, child is eligible for the therapeutic hypothermia. And some contraindication to cooling therapy, number one, intracranial bleed, presence of VPHN or requiring multiple inotropes, some bad coagulopathy, or presence of some lethal chromosomal anomaly or some severe congenital anomaly in unit are excluded for the therapeutic hypothermia. So there are some devices particularly available like ice pack. If you are Miracradle, commonly we are using neotecothermal devices for the cooling therapy. So obviously, if you give the one single sentence, the therapeutic hypothermia reduce the combined outcome of death or neurodevelopmental disability by 24% at 18 months. Okay. Another molecule is called erythropoietin. Due to lack of time, you can go for discussion. I'm straight going to discuss about neonatal seizure, and then if time permit, we go for the prognostication. Fine. So because it's very two topic you have to club today. So fine. So basically, what is seizure? Seizure means, if you clinically define, it is sudden. That means paroxysmal alteration in the neurological function. That means sudden, there is changes in the motor or behavior or autonomic function. I can tell it may be a seizure. So seizure means there is a firing in the brain. Okay. So what is the peculiarity of a neonatal brain? Neonatal brain is not well connected. Due to reduced connectivity, if there is some fire started at one point, it is not easily spread to other parts. For that reason, if from one part of the brain the seizure starts, is unable to become generalized. So most of the neonatal seizures are focal in nature, one part. Number two, neonates are more vulnerable to seizure compared to other age group of life. Why? Very simple thing. Again, preterm neonates are more vulnerable to the seizure compared to term neonates, again, to older age groups. Why? You come to the this slide. Okay, our brain is just balanced by two kind of neurotransmitter. One is excitatory neurotransmitter and another is inhibitory neurotransmitter. If there is a more excitatory neurotransmitter or less inhibitory neurotransmitter, then the fire starts, the seizure happens. Okay, the common inhibitory neurotransmitter is called GABA. The GABA is a inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. In neonatal brain, this GABA just paradoxically behaves. Sometimes this GABA behaves like excitatory. So for that being, neonates are more vulnerable for seizure compared to older age group. One. Number two, the GABAergic antiepileptic drugs, commonly phenobarbital, benzodiazepine, what we are using from newborn to adulthood. Okay. As GABA is behaving as an excitatory neurotransmitter sometimes, so obviously it looks like there is a poor efficacy of GABAergic antiepileptic drugs like phenobarbital or benzodiazepine. Again, the neonatal brain, particularly preterm brain, is evolving phase. There are some susceptible side effects of this anti-epileptic drugs on the neonatal brain. Like now in animal and model, we have seen that phenobarbital has some neuronal apoptic phenomena. So these are concerns about towards neonatal seizure management. First, we will identify clinically the types of neonatal seizure. There are four types of neonatal seizure. Subtle which is very minimal. Subtle is minimal, and also minimal brain effect. Okay, and the subtle seizure is the most common clinical seizure, and usually it manifests in the form of like some kind of like ocular manifestation. Either child has some vacant eye opening or some fluttering of the eyelids. There's some tonic eye deviation. These are ocular phenomena, or some oculofacial and lingual movements like lip smacking, tongue thrusting. This one, a repeated mouth and tongue movement, chewing movements, lip smacking. These are the orofacial lingual movements. There's some limb movements like pedaling, cycling, boxing. These are the limb movements or presence of apnea. So how to distinguish the apneic seizure, which is subtle seizure, versus the apnea prematurity? Normally in apnea, it is associated with hypoxia and bradycardia. But in apneic seizure, during cessation of breathing, there is presence of normal heart rate or tachycardia. Usually it is associated cessation of breathing with tachycardia, initial phase. Then it is called apneic seizure. But in apnea prematurity, cessation of breathing is associated with bradycardia. Though in apneic seizure, initially cessation of breathing with tachycardia, in latter part it is landed in the bradycardia, but usually the cessation of breathing with tachycardia or normal heart rate suggests you may handling apneic seizure. Next is the clonic seizure. So what is clonic seizure? Just look at my hand. The clonic seizure are two parts. This is first contraction, slow relaxation. It's like this. This is clonic seizure. So there is a frequency of the jerk is 1 to 3 jerks per second. and the first contraction, slow relaxation. First contraction, slow relaxation. So this is called clonic seizure. And this clonic seizure, either it could be focal clonic seizure or multifocal clonic seizure. Usually clonic seizures are associated with EEG changes. Most of the subtle seizures are not associated with EEG changes. Then this is called tonic seizure. Tonic seizure is a two kinds. Either it is a focal tonic or it could be generalized tonic. What is tonic? There is sustained flexion or sustained extension of axial or appendicular muscle group is called tonic seizure. Usually focal tonic seizure associated with EEG changes, but generalized tonic seizure, particularly if you look at like a decerebrate posture, when there is a extension of upper and lower limb, or decapitate, where the flexion of upper limb, extension of lower limb. In this posture, these are called generalized seizure. Usually, most of the time, it is the brain stem releasing phenomena, and these are not associated with EEG changes. Then the myoclonic seizure, it's just lightning jerk. Lightning jerk. The speed of jerk is far high speeder than the clonic jerk. And how to distinguish between the myoclonic jerk versus the clonic jerk is that in myoclonic jerk, the lightning first, and there is absence of slow return, like this. Either it is a focal myoclonic, multifocal myoclonic, or generalized myoclonic can happen. Usually, if you look at, if it is the bad prognosis associated with myoclonic seizure. And the EEG is the gold standard. EEG is the gold standard towards diagnosis of neonatal seizure. It is not available in many times in the bedside. Either you have a continuous EEG or you can use the amplitude integrated EEG. So if there is a EEG signature, that is called epileptic seizure. So seizure now with modern science, people want to treat only electrical. See, there are two things. One thing is that there is some paroxysmal movement. What you have seen in my hand, that is a clinical one. Okay. But whether this abnormal movement is associated with my brain EEG abnormality, then that is called, this is EEG seizure. This is clinical seizure. If the presence of EEG abnormality, presence of paroxysmal movement, this is called electroclinical seizure. If there is some clinical seizure, but there is no EEG changes, it is called non-epileptic seizure or clinical seizure. Third thing, there is some EEG abnormality, but there is no clinical seizure. It is called EEG seizure. So, if you were to look at the recent ILE classification, there is three kinds of seizure: epileptic seizure, non-epileptic seizure, or EEG seizure. It is always to target towards the treat the EEG seizure, or we target to treat aggressively to target complete abolition of the EEG seizure. When we found the only EEG seizure? When there is the electroclinical dissociation. Means commonly when a baby having seizure, you are giving phenobarbital. After giving phenobarbital, many a times there is no clinical seizure. There is no seizure. Baby is not seizing. If you will observe the baby, you will not get the seizure. But if you will do an EEG or look at the amplitude integrated EEG, that is a seizure is going on. This is called electroclinical seizure. So this is an example of EEG seizure, but there is no clinical manifestation happens. So little bit it looks a little bit complex. I am not going to discuss. But one thing I want to give message that in most of the centers, the EEG bedside EEG is not available. So you should know, identify the semiology of seizure, types of seizure, presence or absence of seizure. We should distinguish whether seizure or not seizure. That means it is called paroxysmal non-epileptic event. Okay. So there is some common example is the benign neonatal sleep myoclonus. Usually, if you take history, is found particularly let's say neonates during sleep or transition to sleep. There is a myoclonic jerk happens, but it is absent during awakening period. And it can happen from birth to 3 months of life. I'm telling you, today I found one patient came today. The child presenting myoclonic, they came to me at 2 months of life, history of myoclonic seizures since last 15 days. So that is the benign neonatal sleep myoclonus can be present from birth to 3 months. And one thing, another thing, there are 2 points. It is present during sleep and transition to sleep. Very nicely, parents history, going to sleep after sleep. Then another is the jitteriness, another apnea prematurity. But how to distinguish from jitteriness versus seizure or seizuring effect? There are 3 cardinal events associated with seizure. One thing, seizure is associated with autonomic changes. That means when the seizure is present, it changes with some changes in the heart rate, changes in the respiratory rate, some fluctuations in the oxygen. It is associated, may be associated with some eye movement. Third thing, it will be restrained with gentle flexion, to stop with gentle flexion. If child from abnormal chronic jittery, if we hold it, it stops. That means in seizure, it is associated with autonomic changes, associated with the eye movements, abnormal eye movements. It will be restrained with stop with gentle restraint. That is the
Sorry
difference.
to interrupt, Santosh.
Sir.
Please restrict your talk on management and conclude
Yes,
within 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. So it is jitteriness versus the new feature. So if to shortage of time, we'll go for the causes of seizure, but however, the hypoxemic encephalopathy, intracerebral hemorrhage, and neonatal stroke are the common underlying causes of the neonatal seizures, apart from the metabolic causes like hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, and hypomagnesemia. So we come directly go to the seizure management. Right. So when a child admitted either admitted in our casualty or inside the NICU, we found there is some abnormal movement is present, and we clinically diagnosed it is a presence of seizure. So our immediate reflex should go to look at the airway, breathing, and circulation. Okay. After that, we have to rule out the common metabolic causes of neonatal seizure. So our first screening is the metabolic causes is the rule out the hypoglycemia. Do one blood glucose screening. Even your blood glucose screening, unable to do blood glucose screening, glucometer not available, you should go give a glucose bolus of 2 ml per kg, 10% dextrose. And you should put an IVSS and collect sample. And if you have a blood gas, you can look at also ionized calcium, or you can collect some samples for serum electrolyte. After correcting hypoglycemia, if seizure is persisting, or if there is hypoglycemia not present, you may get some clue through the ionized calcium, or you can send some serum electrolyte, give 10% calcium gluconate, 1 to 2 ml per kg over 5 to 10 minutes under cardiac monitoring. So after ruling out the metabolic causes, if child is seizing, then your first anticonvulsant choice is the phenobarbital. And loading dose of the phenobarbital is 20 milligrams per kg. After still child is seizing after 15 to 20 minutes, then you can reload with one more dose of phenobarbital, that is 10 milligram per kg. You can go up to 40 milligram per kg. The concern with the phenobarbital is that it's the side effects of respiratory depression and child will be some, if it go loading dose something 40 milligram per kg or beyond, sometimes child after birth, having birth asphyxia, particularly outborn unit, coming to a tertiary center, they have attended many, they may visited many hospitals, and everyone have already used the phenobarbital. If there is no documentation history of how much, what is the loading dose of phenobarbital, many times child landed in the phenobarbital toxicity. So some center, individual center practice that they don't go beyond the phenobarbital loading dose beyond 30 milligram per kg. After 20, they go to 10. If still the child is severe, then you go second line anti-epileptic drug, that is called phenytoin. Either you may choose the phenytoin or fosphenytoin. Whenever giving phenobarbital or phenytoin, it is always better to give at the rate of 1 milligram per kg per minute. So that give the phenobarbital or phenytoin over 15 to 20 minutes. So the adverse effect is very minimal. Whenever you give phenytoin, giving under the cardiac monitoring. There's a pro-drug of phenytoin is available, that is called fosphenytoin. Whenever if nowadays many people using fosphenytoin in place of phenytoin as the second line anti-epileptic drug. So for fosphenytoin dose is 1.5 milligram fosphenytoin equal to 1 milligram of phenytoin. Equivalent you have to give. And the advantage of fosphenytoin is that you can give the fosphenytoin even the intramuscular route also. And you can give a little bit rapidly also. Less adverse effect is associated with the fosphenytoin. And after giving phenobarbital and fosphenytoin or phenytoin, if child is cesarean, after 20 to 30 minutes, then you think about third line anti-epileptic drug. Either in this scenario, either you can use the benzodiazepine, and the benzodiazepine choice is either your lorazepam, that is dose of 0.5 milligram per kg to 1 milligram per kg, 0.1 milligram per kg, or you can choose for the midazolam. Commonly we use three kinds of benzodiazepine: lorazepam, diazepam, midazolam. Compared to lorazepam, if you look to diazepam has more adverse effect, more respiratory depression, so usually avoided in the neonatal period. So usually the benzodiazepine the choice is the lorazepam or midazolam. Lorazepam usually has a little bit longer duration onset of action, but longer duration of action. Just little more time to onset of action, for longer duration of action. Midazolam has very quickly onset of action and needs a continuous infusion. And if you are when you are using the midazolam infusion, you should always ready for the respiratory support, because many times child have a risk of hypertension, risk of respiratory depression, need of some kind of respiratory support. The newer molecule is the levetiracetam, and it has very minimal side effects, and many upcoming evidence. Many centers also use levetiracetam as the alternative to phenobarbital as the first line of anti-epileptic drug. But however, if you look at the overall impression across the globe, even WHO tells phenobarbital is the initial anticonvulsant of choice in case of neonatal seizure. Levetiracetam are going to replace the second line anti-epileptic drug. So many centers, the protocol is very different permutation combination people use. Some people go for the phenobarbital 20 plus 10, 30 milligram. Second line they use the levetiracetam. So less chance of side effects and adverse effects of the levetiracetam is very minimal. Some people also use levetiracetam also initial loading dose, followed by also use also phenobarbital. But the universal protocol is that phenobarbital is the first loading initial anticonvulsant drug. Secondly, either you can use up to 30 milligrams or 40 milligrams per kg maximum loading dose of phenobarbital. You can go second line anti-epileptic drug. Either you can use fosphenytoin or levetiracetam. as per your own unit protocol. And third line, you may prefer to go for as the benzodiazepine. Either you can use midazolam or lorazepam. If in spite of this thing child is seizing, then you think about the refractory neonatal seizure. And before going to that, that's a very concept that what is the efficacy of this commonly used anti-epileptic drug. If you compare phenobarbital and phenytoin, both have equal efficacy towards seizure control. One, and the efficacy of phenobarbital or phenytoin is around 50%. This is a landmark study. They have looked at what is the efficacy of anti-epileptic drugs. If you give phenobarbital with dose of 20 milligram per kg, 30% seizure will control. If you go to the loading dose maximum 40 milligram per kg, 70% seizure will control. If you use phenobarbital followed by second line phenytoin, you will control 85% seizure control. So phenobar plus phenytoin plus benzodiazepine, around 95 to 100% seizure will control. So if you look at the levetiracetam, again the efficacy of levetiracetam is very variable in different studies. Most of the again in the different studies, as is the newer AD in neonatal period, all studies have used different loading dose, but with loading dose of something 50 milligram per kg, we have around 60% seizure control is achieved. When you suspect some refractory seizure, means after using 3 anti-epileptic drugs, or you have a high index of some clue towards some metabolic seizure, you can evaluate specifically, and you can use this vitamin responsive molecules, like you can go for the pyridoxine, and to give the one suspect pyridoxine dependent seizure or pyridoxal 5-phosphate dependent seizure, you can use the pyridoxine which commonly is available in the injection Neurobion. You can give the intramuscular, you can give followed by oral pyridoxine, or you give many times you give the cocktail of pyridoxine and folinic acid and biotin for the refractory neonatal seizure. So now if you are requiring your baby requiring multiple AD to control seizure, let's say baby requiring phenobarbital, after giving the loading dose 30 milligram, you given the maintenance dose 3 to 5 milligram per kg per day after 12 hours of loading dose, and again you give the phenytoin and given maintenance dose 4 to 8 milligram per kg per day, and levetiracetam let's be given maintenance dose of 10 to 30 milligram per kg day. How to win up this anticonvulsant? So usually the clinical practice, people used to win up the anticonvulsant one by one and try to keep last to the phenobarbital. That is, win all anticonvulsant except phenobarbital. And during winning of the anticonvulsant, most of the clinicians usually after stopping one anticonvulsant observe for 48 hours. If no further seizure, then we stop our second anticonvulsant. And so win all anti-epileptic drugs except phenobarbital once the seizure is controlled. Always the principle of anti-epileptic drugs is that try to use monotherapy and lowest possible drug, and try to use for the shorter duration. So the basic principle is that do a neurological examination prior to discharge. Commonly Hammersmith, you can go for the neurological examination, infant neurological examination. Do a neurological examination, look at the tone, look at the posture, look at the sensorium, look at how child is feeding, sucking, rooting, neonatal reflexes is present commonly. If your child is satisfactory, sucking, breastfeeding is feeding well, tone is normal, okay. And if when you are not a facility of EEG and MRI, if child is neurologically normal, you many extent confidently may stop phenobarbital prior to discharge. That means you can stop all AD prior to discharge.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to interrupt you.
2 minutes more. 2 minutes more. Yeah.
Yes.
If you have some abnormal neurological examination, or you have some EEG which is suggestive of some epileptic or some background abnormalities there, continue phenobarbital. Again, reassess at 1 month. If at the end of the at 1 month, if neurologic examination is normal, you can taper the phenobarbital over 2 weeks. If your neurological examination is abnormal, you evaluate an EEG. If your EEG is normal, again you may option of tapering over next 2 weeks. And if EEG is abnormal, you continue the drug for 3 months and again reassess at 3 and 6 and 9 months, same sequentially. So one thing I tell, if a child have a neonatal seizure, they are more vulnerable for post-neonatal seizure in 20% cases. And these neonates are vulnerable also for intellectual disability and cerebral palsy in 30 to 35% cases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.